A black waitress serves Keanu Reeves in a quiet diner. As he leaves, he hands her a handwritten note. She reads it, her hands trembling, and bursts into tears, stunned by his heartfelt words. What could he have written to spark such an emotional reaction? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more inspiring stories. It was a quiet Wednesday evening in Los Angeles, the kind where the city's buzz softened into a low hum. Jasmine Carter, a 27-year-old waitress working at Mel's Diner on Sunset Boulevard, was used to serving late-night customers, a mix of locals, night owls and the occasional celebrity, but nothing could have prepared her for who walked in that night or what he would leave behind. Keanu Reeves, the enigmatic Hollywood star, stepped inside dressed simply in a black leather jacket and jeans. His unassuming demeanor caught Jasmine off guard. She was used to high-maintenance celebrities, but Keanu's kind smile immediately put her at ease. Jasmine, a single mom juggling long shifts and college night classes, prided herself on her ability to stay professional around famous faces, but there was something about Keanu, his warmth, the way he genuinely looked her in the eye when he spoke, that made her feel seen, not just as a waitress but as a person. He ordered coffee and a slice of pie, simple, quiet, yet the brief exchanges between them felt meaningful. They talked about the weather, the city and the book she studied. When he noticed her textbook peeking out from behind the counter, he listened intently, as if her words held the same weight as those of an old friend. When he finished, Keane waved politely, placed cash on the table and slid a folded piece of paper toward her. "This is for you," he said softly. Jasmine, caught off guard, barely managed to thank him before he disappeared out the door. Curious, she opened the note as her shift ended, expecting a generic thank you or an autograph. Instead, her eyes widened. She read the words, her heart pounding. Tears filled her eyes. The note wasn't just kind, it was deeply personal, almost as if he knew her struggles, her hopes, her dreams. Jasmine clutched the note against her chest, her mind spinning. How could a stranger, a man she'd only served pie and coffee to, know the very words she needed to hear in that moment, the words that spoke directly to her pain and strength? As the diner emptied, Jasmine stayed behind, replaying the encounter in her mind. What had inspired him to leave such a note? Had someone told him about her life? Or was it simply Keanu's uncanny ability to connect with people on a level that felt otherworldly? Jasmine didn't know the answers, but what she did know was that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand, and as she held the note tightly, she vowed to discover why his words had the power to touch her soul so deeply. Jasmine sat in her car outside the diner, the folded note trembling in her hands. Her fingers traced the edges as if she were holding a secret too fragile to open. She could still hear his voice, calm and sincere, saying, "This is for you." Finally, with a deep breath, she unfolded it again. Under the dim glow of the street lights, the words were handwritten, a little uneven, as if he had written them quickly but with purpose. To the woman behind the counter who listens more than she speaks, who smiles even when she's carrying the weight of the world. I see you. Don't give up on yourself. The world needs people like you more than you know. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. It wasn't just what he said, but how those words reached the deepest parts of her heart. Keanu didn't know her, didn't know how much she struggled to keep it all together. The endless hours, the mounting bills, her little boy waiting at home asking when life would get easier, and yet somehow he did know. Jasmine's mind raced. How could a stranger, a Hollywood star of all people, connect with her on such a personal level? For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen. The note didn't end there. Beneath his heartfelt message, he had written something else, almost as an afterthought. P.S. I hope this helps a little. Folded into the note was a check. Jasmine's heart stopped as she saw the amount, $5. 000 she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her breath came in shallow bursts as disbelief flooded her. This wasn't just a kind gesture, it was life-changing. With that money she could finally pay off her overdue rent, fix her car, and maybe even cut back on hours to spend more time with her son. But what stayed with her more than the money was the thought behind it, the simple act of kindness from a man who owed her nothing. As the days passed, the note became more than a memory, it became a source of strength. Jasmine carried it in her wallet, reading it during difficult moments, reminding herself that even in the darkest times there were people who believed in her. The encounter sparked something inside her, a desire to pay it forward. She started saving little by little, leaving anonymous gifts for other struggling waitresses she worked with. But what Jasmine didn't know was that her story was far from over. Keanu hadn't just left a note and walked away, he had stayed close enough to watch her reaction from the shadows. Wanting to make sure she accepted the gift, what he saw in her genuine shock and gratitude, stirred something within him too. In the weeks that followed, he couldn't get her out of his mind. She wasn't just another person he had helped, she had reminded him why he did it in the first place. Her resilience, her quiet strength, it was inspiring. One day as Jasmine was picking up her son from school, she noticed a familiar black car parked across the street. For a brief moment her heart skipped a beat, thinking she recognized the figure inside, but the car drove away before she could be sure. Little did she know their paths were destined to cross again, and when they did, it wouldn't just be about a note or a kind gesture, it would be the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated, a connection that would forever change their lives. Weeks turned into months, and though life had gotten a little easier for Jasmine, she couldn't shake the memory of that night at the diner. She kept the note tucked in her wallet, pulling it out whenever she felt overwhelmed or uncertain. It was more than just words on paper, it was a lifeline, a reminder that someone, even a stranger, believed in her. One evening as she was getting ready for her shift, her 7-year-old son Elijah tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he said, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity, "when are we going to go on a trip, like to the beach or something fun?" Her heart sank. She'd been so focused on surviving that she hadn't thought much about giving Elijah the kind of childhood he deserved. "Soon, baby," she whispered, forcing a smile, but inside she wondered if she could ever really afford to give him more. Later that night at the diner, Jasmine was wiping down tables when a man walked in. She froze for a split second. She thought it was him, the same dark hair, the same quiet presence, but as the man approached she realized it wasn't Keanu, it was someone delivering an envelope. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her before quickly leaving. Jasmine's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was another note written in the same handwriting as before: "Every journey deserves a destination. Don't let life hold you back from the moments that matter. Take a chance on yourself and on happiness." Enclosed with the note was a pair of plane tickets, round trip, first class to Hawaii. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her manager noticed her stunned expression and came over. "Everything okay?" Jasmine nodded, but she couldn't find the words to explain what had just happened. Who was doing this? Why? And how could she ever deserve this kind of kindness? That night as she tucked Elijah into bed, she showed him the tickets. His face lit up with joy, and for the first time in a long time Jasmine felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, life was beginning to change. But even as she planned for the trip, a small part of her couldn't stop wondering, was this just random acts of kindness from a generous stranger, or was it something more? And why did she keep catching glimpses of that black car parked inconspicuously near her apartment or her son's school? The trip to Hawaii was magical. Elijah laughed and played on the beach, his laughter filling Jasmine's heart in a way she hadn't felt in years. Yet as she sat on the sand one evening while watching the sun set over the ocean, her thoughts drifted to him, to the man who had set all of this in motion. When they returned home, life felt lighter, brighter, but the mystery lingered. She decided she couldn't just leave it unanswered. She needed to know the Truth. One evening as she walked Elijah to school, she saw the black car again. This time she didn't hesitate. She marched up to it, her heart pounding, and tapped on the window. The window rolled down slowly, and there he was, Keanu Reeves, looking at her with that same gentle expression she remembered from the diner. "I thought you'd never ask," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with something she couldn't quite place, relief, maybe even admiration. Jasmine's knees felt weak, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions. Why was all she could manage to whisper. Keanu smiled a little wistfully. "Because someone once believed in me when I thought no one did, and when I saw you that night something told me you were the kind of person who needed someone to remind you how extraordinary you are." She stared at him, speechless, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't about charity or pity, it was about connection. Before she could respond, Elijah's voice broke the moment. "Mom, who's that?" Keanu knelt down to Elijah's level, his eyes kind. "Just someone who thinks your mom is pretty amazing." Jasmine's heart swelled, tears welling up as she realized this was no longer just a fleeting encounter. This was the beginning of something unexpected, something beautiful, and for the first time in a long time she let herself believe that she deserved it. Jasmine stood there, her heart pounding so hard she thought Keanu might hear it. She hadn't expected this moment, hadn't dared to even dream it, yet here he was in front of her, speaking to her son as if they were old friends. "Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" she finally blurted out, her voice shaky but sincere. Keanu looked up at her, his eyes thoughtful, as if he was weighing his words carefully. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible," he said. His tone was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of his truth. "And I saw you that night, not just a waitress, not just someone working hard. I saw you and I couldn't walk away." Jasmine's breath caught. She wasn't sure whether it was his words or the raw honesty in his voice that made her want to cry. Elijah, unaware of the depth of the moment, tugged on Keanu's sleeve. "Do you like superheroes?" he asked, his inane curiosity cutting through the tension. Keanu chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "I do," he said, glancing at Jasmine with a small smile, "and I think your mom might be one." Jasmine bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. This man, this larger-than-life figure, was treating her and her son as if they mattered, not as charity cases, not as fans, but as people. Before she could say more, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "I want you to have this," he said, handing it to her. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The card was simple, with a number scrolled on one side. "If you ever need someone to listen," he said, his gaze steady, "or if you just need a friend, call me." Jasmine stared at the card, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu's smile faltered just for a second, as if a shadow crossed his face. "Because someone once gave me that chance," he said quietly, "and I promised myself I'd do the same for others whenever I could." She wanted to ask more, to understand the pain behind his words, but Elijah interrupted again, his young voice full of excitement. "Can we see you again?" Keanu looked at the boy, then back at Jasmine, his expression unreadable. "For a moment." "That depends," he said, his tone light but sincere. "Would your mom be okay with that?" Jasmine hesitated, torn between her instincts to protect her heart and the undeniable connection she felt in that moment. Finally she nodded, her voice barely audible. "I think we'd like that." Keanu's smile returned, softer this time. "Good," he said simply, "then we'll see each other again." With that he stood, gave Elijah a small wave, and walked back to his car. Jasmine watched as he drove away, the weight of the moment settling over her. For the first time in years she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time, hope. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, the card Keanu had given her held tightly in her hands. The city lights twinkled outside, but her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Every word he'd spoken replayed in her mind. What had made him notice her of all people, and why couldn't she shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something bigger? Elijah's soft breathing filled the tiny apartment as he slept, clutching the seashell he'd found on the beach in Hawaii. She glanced at him, her heart swelling with love and determination. For years she'd fought to give him a better life, sacrificing everything for his happiness, and now for the first time she felt like someone was fighting for her too. But the question remained why. The next morning Jasmine found herself reaching for her phone, the card still on the table beside her. Her fingers hovered over the number, nerves twisting in her stomach. Was it really okay to call? What would she even say? Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed. The line rang twice before a familiar calm voice answered. Jasmine. Keanu said, his tone warm and knowing. Her breath caught. How did you know it was me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I hoped it would be, he replied simply. How are you? She hesitated, unsure how to respond to such a genuine question. I don't know, she admitted, confused, maybe grateful. I don't even know where to start. Then don't, he said gently, just say what's on your mind. Jasmine took a deep breath. Why me? Why did you do all of this? The note, the money, the trip. Why would you go out of your way for someone like me? There was a brief pause on the other end, and when Keanu spoke again, his voice was softer, tinged with emotion. Because I've been where you are, he said, working hard, doing everything you can for someone you love, and feeling like it's never enough. I've seen that kind of strength before, and I know how much it takes out of you. I wanted you to know you're not alone. Jasmine's throat tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until that moment. But you don't even know me, she whispered. I know enough, Keanu replied. I know you've been through more than most people could handle, and you're still standing. That tells me everything I need to know. For a moment there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like they were connected even through the phone, sharing something neither of them could fully explain. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything. Why do you do it? Helping strangers like me. Keanu hesitated, and when he spoke his voice carried a quiet vulnerability. Because someone once showed me that kindness has the power to change everything, and because I've lost people who mattered to me, people I didn't get the chance to help when I should have. I can't change the past, but I can try to make a difference now. Jasmine's heart ached at the raw honesty in his words. She wanted to ask more, to understand the pain behind his actions, but something told her not to push in. Instead she said, thank you for everything. You don't owe me thanks, he said. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't give up on yourself, and if you ever feel like you're losing your way, call me anytime. Jasmine smiled through her tears, a warmth spreading through her chest. I promise. When the call ended she sat there for a long time, the weight of his words settling over her. It wasn't just the kindness he'd shown her, it was the way he saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. As days turned into weeks, Jasmine found herself thinking of Keanu often. She kept his card in her wallet, her mind filled with questions she hadn't dared to ask. Who had he lost? What had shaped him into the man he was? And why did she feel like their story wasn't over? One evening as she was putting Elijah to bed, he asked, Mom, do you think we'll see him again? Jasmine brushed a curl from his forehead and kissed him goodnight. I don't know, baby, she said softly, but maybe. And deep down she hoped he was right, because for the first time in years her life felt like it was headed somewhere new, somewhere she wasn't afraid to follow. The days passed slowly, but the memory of Keanu lingered in Jasmine's mind like the hum of a familiar song. She kept replaying their phone conversation, the way he spoke with such sincerity, as though he knew her pain without her ever saying a word. It wasn't just his kindness that had moved her, it was the way he'd made her feel seen, as if she wasn't alone in the world anymore. One evening after her shift, Jasmine was sitting at the kitchen table while Elijah worked on a drawing of the beach they'd visited in Hawaii. What are you making, buddy? She asked, her tired smile growing as he held up the picture. It's for him, Elijah said matter-of-factly, his little brow furrowed in concentration. For who? She asked, confused. For the man who made us happy, Elijah said without looking up. I want to give it to him. Jasmine's throat tightened, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. How could she explain to her son that they might never see Keanu again, that his act of Kindness, while life-changing, might have been the end of their story, but before she could find the words there was a knock at the door. Jasmine froze. It was late and she wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart raced as she stood cautiously approaching the door. She peeked through the peephole and gasped it was him. Keanu stood there, hands in his pockets, looking almost shy. He glanced up as she opened the door, his familiar smile easing some of her surprise. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." She managed her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah came bounding over, his excitement uncontainable. "You're here," he exclaimed, holding up his drawing. "I made this for you." Keanu knelt down, accepting the picture with a smile that lit up his entire face. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Thank you, Elijah. I'm going to keep this forever." Jasmine watched the exchange, her heart swelling. "I wasn't expecting to see you again," she admitted softly, still standing in the doorway. "I wasn't planning to show up unannounced," Keanu said, standing back up, "but I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Her eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of pretense, but there was none. "We're okay," she said, her voice steady. "More than okay, thanks to you." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't do anything special, Jasmine. I just wanted to remind you of what you already had inside you: strength, resilience, love." Tears welled in her eyes and she looked away, trying to compose herself. "You don't even realize what you've done for us," she said. "For me?" Keanu hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally he stepped closer, his voice low. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded, her heart pounding. "I didn't just see you that night at the diner," he said. "I saw someone who reminded me of my mom. She was strong like you. She worked so hard to give me everything, even when life wasn't kind to her. I lost her a long time ago, and I guess in a way helping you felt like honoring her." Jasmine's tears spilled over her emotions, overwhelming her. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "and thank you for sharing that with me." He smiled, his eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to make you cry." "You didn't," she said, wiping her cheeks. "You just reminded me how good people can be." Elijah tugged on Keanu's sleeve, breaking the moment. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked, his wide-eyed innocence melting any lingering tension. Keanu laughed softly, glancing at Jasmine. "Only if it's okay with your mom." Jasmine smiled through her tears. "We'd love that." The night passed in a blur of laughter, conversation and connection. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. Keanu wasn't just a celebrity or a stranger anymore, he was someone who truly cared. As he left later that evening, he turned to Jasmine at the door. "I'll be around," he said. "If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me." She nodded, her heart full. "Thank you for everything." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that felt like a promise. "Take care of yourself, Jasmine, and keep believing in what's possible." As he walked away, Jasmine stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the night. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt ready to face it, because sometimes the kindness of a stranger isn't just a moment, it's a new beginning. And for Jasmine and Elijah, that kindness had opened a door they never thought possible, leading to a brighter, more hopeful tomorrow.